The aid convoy appeared completely legitimate. United Nations markings on vehicles, proper documentation, medical supplies and food destined for refugee camps in conflict zones. The organization had been operating for 8 years with impeccable credentials. But an intelligence analyst noticed something impossible. Aid workers from this organization were present at 3 different terror attack sites in the hours before strikes occurred. Not as victims, as observers who left before the violence began. This is the story of how a radical extremist network created a fake humanitarian organization that operated for 8 years under international protection. How they used humanitarian access to conflict zones to plan attacks, move operatives, and build networks. And how their final operation targeted a refugee camp where 4,000 people, mostly women and children, would have died. The world trusted them because they carried the banner of humanitarian aid. They had UN partnerships, government grants, and celebrity endorsements. They operated in the most dangerous regions helping the most vulnerable people, until someone realized the helpers were actually hunters. And the secret elite decided this deception needed to end. The perfect disguise. The organization called itself International Relief Foundation, IRF. Founded 8 years ago with a mission about providing aid in conflict zones where traditional organizations couldn't operate. Their specialty was reaching populations in active war zones, areas controlled by extremist groups, and regions where government authority had collapsed. The founder presented as an idealistic humanitarian who had witnessed suffering in multiple conflicts and decided to create an organization that would operate regardless of political complications or security risks. He recruited staff with conflict zone experience. He secured funding from governments and private donors. IRF established operations in 9 countries across the Middle East, Africa, and Asia. They provided medical care in war zones. They delivered food to besieged populations. They evacuated wounded civilians. They operated with UN blessing, government cooperation, and international recognition. Their credentials were impeccable. They followed humanitarian principles. They maintained neutrality. They provided documented evidence, photos of clinics treating patients, videos of food distributions, reports on populations served. Everything appeared legitimate, but beneath the humanitarian facade, IRF was something else entirely. A sophisticated extremist network using humanitarian access as cover for terrorist operations. The deception was carefully constructed over years. IRF did provide actual humanitarian aid, enough to maintain legitimacy and generate documentation. Real medical clinics treated real patients. Real food distributions fed real hungry people. The aid was genuine, but only about 30% of IRF's operations were actual humanitarian work. The remaining 70% was something darker. The organization's access to conflict zones gave them capabilities traditional terrorist networks couldn't achieve. They could move operatives across borders using humanitarian worker visas. They could enter areas controlled by governments or opposition forces by claiming humanitarian mission. They could transport materials by hiding them in aid shipments receiving minimal inspection. They could gather intelligence by operating in regions where foreign presence was otherwise impossible. The staff structure maintained operational security. About 40% of IRF's employees were genuine humanitarian workers, with no knowledge of the organization's real purpose. These people truly believed they were helping vulnerable populations. Their sincerity was real and made the deception more effective. Another 40% were knowing participants in the extremist network. These individuals used humanitarian roles as cover for operational activities. They gathered intelligence, contacted local extremist cells, coordinated logistics for attacks, and recruited potential operatives from refugee populations. The final 20% were operational commanders who managed the network while maintaining humanitarian cover. These individuals appeared to be senior aid workers. In reality, they were planning and coordinating terrorist operations. Over 8 years, IRF had been involved in facilitating 23 terrorist attacks across 6 countries. Their role varied, providing intelligence about targets, moving operatives into position, delivering materials disguised as humanitarian supplies, creating diversions pulling security attention away from attack locations. The attacks they facilitated killed over 800 people, bombings in markets and transportation hubs, assassinations of government officials and journalists, armed assaults on security forces. Each attack appeared to be local extremist groups' work. Intelligence services never connected them to a humanitarian organization operating with international protection, because who would suspect an aid organization endorsed by the UN and funded by Western governments of being a terrorist front? The organization had also been recruiting from refugee populations. They identified traumatized, angry individuals who had lost everything to conflict. They offered these people purpose, belonging, and a way to fight back. IRF's humanitarian work gave them access to exactly the populations most vulnerable to radicalization. They had recruited 47 individuals from refugee camps over 8 years. Some became operatives who participated in attacks. Others became support personnel. All were radicalized through an organization that appeared to be helping them. But IRF's most ambitious operation was still in planning. They had identified a refugee camp hosting approximately 4,000 people, mostly women and children displaced by years of fighting. The camp received regular aid deliveries from multiple organizations, including IRF. The extremist network planned to use their humanitarian access to plant explosives throughout the camp during what would appear to be routine aid delivery. Bombs would be hidden in food storage areas, medical facilities, gathering spaces. Attack would be triggered during maximum population density, when families gathered for meal distribution. Projected casualties: between 2,000 and 3,000 dead, with additional thousands injured. The attack would be blamed on the conflict's opposing faction. It would trigger retaliation and escalate the war. And IRF would be seen as tragic victims, further burnishing their humanitarian reputation while achieving extremist goals. The operation was scheduled to occur in 42 days. Explosives were being prepared, insertion plan being finalized, operatives being briefed. But someone had noticed the impossible pattern. An investigation was revealing the truth behind 8 years of humanitarian deception. The investigation that exposed evil. The breakthrough came from a counterterrorism analyst specializing in attack pattern analysis. She examined data from multiple terror incidents across countries, looking for connections indicating coordinated networks. She noticed something unusual. Aid workers from IRF had been documented at 3 different attack locations in hours before strikes occurred. Pattern might have been dismissed as coincidence. Humanitarian workers were often present in dangerous areas where attacks happen. But timing bothered her. She expanded analysis to examine IRF's operational footprint. The organization operated in 9 countries. She cross-referenced their documented presence with terrorist attack data. Correlation was impossible to dismiss as random chance. In 6 of 9 countries where IRF operated, terrorist attacks occurred within 48 hours of IRF staff being documented in those specific areas. Attacks happened in towns where IRF had offices, along routes where IRF had recently delivered aid, near facilities where IRF staff had been observed. Investigation expanded. Intelligence resources directed toward examining IRF more closely. Financial analysis, communications monitoring, surveillance of key staff, examination of operational patterns. What emerged over 8 weeks was horrifying. Communications intercepts revealed coded discussions about operations having nothing to do with humanitarian aid. Financial analysis showed money flowing through IRF accounts, not aligning with documented aid work. Surveillance documented meetings between IRF staff and known extremist operatives. Background checks revealed radicalization indicators that hadn't raised flags because of IRF's humanitarian cover. Investigation identified staff structure. Genuine humanitarian workers who were unwitting pawns. Knowing participants who used humanitarian roles as terrorist cover. Operational commanders who managed the network while appearing to be senior aid workers. Most critically, intelligence revealed IRF's next operation. Intercepted communications referenced a major project at a priority location with timeline of 42 days. Further investigation identified the target. Refugee camp hosting 4,000 people. Method: explosives hidden during humanitarian delivery. Objective: mass casualty attack blamed on opposing faction. Investigation also documented IRF's historical involvement in 23 previous attacks. Their role in operations that killed over 800 people. Their recruitment of 47 individuals from refugee populations. The systematic way they weaponized humanitarian access and international trust. Intelligence reached secret elite with urgent assessment. IRF represented unprecedented threat. Extremist network operating under humanitarian cover with international protection. They had access traditional terrorist organizations couldn't achieve. They had built in plausible deniability through genuine aid work. And they were 42 days from executing an attack that would kill thousands. Authorization came within 72 hours. Mission was clear: stop the attack, dismantle the network, expose the deception, preserve international humanitarian operations. The dismantling operation. Operation required unprecedented coordination. 9 countries where IRF operated. 18 field offices and operational locations. 63 staff members who were knowing participants or operational commanders. 114 genuine humanitarian workers needing protection. And most critically, refugee camp where 4,000 people were targeted for massacre. Planning took 6 weeks. Each IRF location required surveillance to identify genuine aid workers versus terrorist operatives. Financial networks needed mapping. Operational commanders needed tracking. Attack plan needed full understanding to ensure no element could proceed if primary operatives were apprehended. 0 hours set for 0300 hours coordinated across 6 time zones. Operations would occur simultaneously to prevent any part of network from warning others. Terrorism Phase 1. Secure the target. Refugee camp IRF plan to attack was in conflict zone with limited government control. Security was minimal. Access controlled by local authorities with IRF partnerships. Covert team had infiltrated camp posing as staff from different aid organization. They documented IRF's operational patterns, when they visited, which areas they accessed, how they moved through facility. They identified where explosives would likely be hidden. At 0300 hours local time, team conducted covert sweep. They located and secured 12 explosive devices that had been pre-positioned during previous IRF visits. Devices were sophisticated, remotely detonated systems hidden in storage facilities, medical supply areas, gathering spaces, exactly as intelligence predicted. Explosives were disarmed and removed. Camp's population of 4,000 continued sleeping, unaware they had been hours from mass murder. Phase 2. Apprehend the network. As attack was being prevented, simultaneous operations targeted IRF's operational personnel across 9 countries. 18 operational commanders who managed terrorist network while maintaining humanitarian cover were prioritized for immediate apprehension. 12 arrested through coordinated action with local law enforcement. 4 extracted through classified methods from the countries where cooperation was complicated. 2 attempted flight, both intercepted at borders. 45 knowing participants were similarly targeted. Many apprehended through operations appearing to be local law enforcement actions against terrorism suspects. Within 18 hours, all 63 operational commanders and knowing participants were in custody or eliminated. IRF's terrorist network was completely decapitated. Phase 3. Protect the innocent. 114 genuine humanitarian workers who had no knowledge of IRF's real purpose presented complex challenge. These people believed they worked for legitimate aid organization. Learning their employer was terrorist front would be devastating. Intelligence services coordinated to process these workers as witnesses rather than suspects. They were interviewed about their work, observations, interactions with colleagues. Questioning documented their innocence while gathering intelligence. Workers were provided support services and assistance finding employment with legitimate aid organizations. Most cleared within weeks and continued humanitarian work elsewhere. None were prosecuted or publicly implicated. Phase 4. Expose the network. Evidence collected was carefully packaged for public disclosure. Goal was to expose IRF's deception while protecting legitimate humanitarian work. Disclosure occurred through coordinated announcements in multiple countries. Officials announced terrorist network had been operating under humanitarian cover. They provided evidence of IRF's involvement in 23 attacks. They documented prevented attack on refugee camp. They emphasized genuine humanitarian workers had been victims of deception. Response was immediate and intense. UN revoked IRF's partnership. Governments demanded audits. Donors felt betrayed. Media coverage was extensive, but disclosure was carefully managed to avoid damaging legitimate humanitarian operations. The statements emphasized IRF was an anomaly, sophisticated deception that exploited international goodwill, but didn't represent humanitarian organizations generally. The attack that never happened. At refugee camp IRF had targeted, life continued normally. Families woke up. Children went to school programs. Adults searched for work. 4,000 people going about daily struggles to survive displacement. They never knew 12 explosive devices had been hidden among them. Never knew organization claiming to help had planned to murder them. Never knew their gathering spaces, food storage, medical facilities had been rigged to explode. Attack that would have killed between 2,000 and 3,000 people never occurred. Explosives removed before anyone knew they existed. Operatives planning to trigger devices were in custody. Network that spent 8 years building toward this moment was dismantled. World learned about prevented attack through government disclosures. News described the prevented massacre. Photos of disarmed explosives were released. Scale of what had been prevented was documented. But 4,000 people at camp were spared trauma of knowing how close they came. They were told increased security presence was routine. They continued receiving aid from legitimate organizations. The deception that ended. Operational assessment documented numbers. 8 years of operations under humanitarian cover. 23 terrorist attacks facilitated. Over 800 people killed. 47 individuals recruited from refugee populations. 63 operational commanders and knowing participants apprehended. 114 genuine humanitarian workers protected. 1 planned attack on 4,000 refugees prevented. Most significant outcome was exposing deception that threatened to undermine international humanitarian work entirely. IRF had weaponized trust. They exploited that humanitarian organizations operate in dangerous areas, need access to conflict zones, receive minimal scrutiny because of their mission. They created sophisticated system where genuine humanitarian work provided cover for terrorism. If deception hadn't been exposed, the model could have been replicated. Other extremist networks could have created similar front organizations. Humanitarian access could have become standard terrorist tactic. International community's ability to provide aid in conflict zones could have been fatally compromised. 63 operational commanders and knowing participants faced prosecution in multiple countries. Many received lengthy prison sentences. Operational commanders who managed network while maintaining humanitarian cover faced harshest penalties. Exploitation of humanitarian principles treated as aggravating factor. 47 individuals recruited from refugee populations were processed through de-radicalization programs. Many had been traumatized by conflict, then exploited by organization claiming to help them. Genuine humanitarian workers who had been unknowing participants struggled with revelation. Many felt betrayed and guilty despite having done nothing wrong. Support services helped them process trauma and continue humanitarian work elsewhere. The trust that was preserved. Secret Elites operation was designed not just to stop terrorism, but to protect humanitarian work itself. Disclosure emphasized IRF was anomaly. Genuine humanitarian workers were victims. Aid organizations in conflict zones continued to deserve support. International humanitarian community implemented enhanced vetting procedures. Oversight mechanisms strengthened. Intelligence sharing improved. But legitimate humanitarian access was preserved and protected, because world still needed organizations willing to work in most dangerous places, helping most vulnerable people. And that work couldn't be allowed to fail, because one sophisticated deception weaponized humanitarian principles. In files that don't officially exist, complete record remains. Investigation identifying impossible pattern. Intelligence revealing 8 years of deception. Operational planning dismantling network across 9 countries. Prevention of attack targeting 4,000 refugees. And simple statement, extremist network operated 8 years under humanitarian cover. Facilitated 23 attacks killing over 800. Planned massacre of 4,000 refugees. Network identified, operations dismantled. Attack prevented, deception exposed. Humanitarian trust preserved. Extremists believed humanitarian cover made them untouchable. They believed international protection would shield operations. They believed trust placed in aid organizations would prevent detection. They believed until simultaneous operations across 9 countries apprehended personnel, seized explosives, exposed 8-year deception. Organization claiming to help the most vulnerable had planned to murder them. Aid workers who were trusted had been hunting targets. Humanitarian access granted in good faith had been weaponized for terrorism. But someone noticed impossible pattern. Someone investigated despite improbable connection. Someone coordinated operations across 9 countries to dismantle network before 4,000 people were murdered. And somewhere in classified files, final notation, 8 years of humanitarian deception, 23 attacks facilitated, 4,000 refugees targeted for massacre, 63 terrorists arrested, attack prevented, deception exposed, trust preserved.